This is Kayte Young. Today on Nice Work, a conversation with photographer Rania Matar and contemporary art curator Leila Reichert. We're talking about Rania's latest exhibition at the Eskenazi Museum of Art on the IU Bloomington campus. The show features portraits of young women in Lebanon. The women are posing in abandoned buildings around Beirut or in natural landscapes like an apple orchard, an olive grove, or a field of poppies. The exhibit is called Where Do I Go? A question many young Lebanese women face in a country that's been through one crisis after another. From a 15-year civil war in the 1970s and 80s, to ongoing clashes with neighboring Israel, to a devastating port explosion in 2020, to political corruption and economic collapse. The current crisis includes war between Israel and Hezbollah, an Iranian-backed militia and political party in Lebanon. Close to 1 million Lebanese civilians have been displaced, and the Israeli military is currently attempting to occupy the south of Lebanon as a buffer zone. So the question for these young Lebanese women, where do I go, is as relevant as ever. Here's photographer Rania Matar.
I'm from Lebanon. I was born and raised during the Lebanese Civil War. I left Lebanon in 1984 to come and study in the United States. I had started my studies as in architecture, and I transferred to Cornell. And it was very difficult to leave, and I left because the situation got pretty bad in Lebanon. What happened in 1984 was when I left, I was at AUB, the American University of Beirut, and they had killed the American president of the university.
Oh my God, right.
There was the bombing of the Marines, and then the bombing of the American University, which was literally next to the architecture building where I was at the moment. And then the war came too close to home. So this is a lot of people who could afford or who were able to transfer did at that time. In 2019, there was a lot of protests in Lebanon against the corrupt government, against the sectarianism in the government and the whole constitution. And there was so much hope. So it was all these young people, and it was so beautiful to see because they would camp downtown, and you'll have a guy named Muhammad camping with a guy named Kevin. It's like they didn't care if anybody is Muslim, Shia, Sunni, Christian. It didn't matter. It was very, very invigorating. And then right after that, COVID happened, and the country shut down, and that was the end of that. And then the explosions happened. So the economy in Lebanon completely collapsed. People would wait 5 hours to fill gas in their car. It was actually heartbreaking how bad it got.
I was watching protests in 2019 on my phone, following friends, and it was, even for me, like as an American who was invested in the future of Lebanon, watching those protests, it was so galvanizing. And so many of my friends were out there. They were DJing, they were cooking together.
It was beautiful.
There was like this total collapse of the sectarianism and this kind of like, this is maybe the reckoning that Lebanon needed to move forward. And then, which made the tragedy of the explosion and the economic collapse and everything and COVID and the wars that happened so much more tragic because the hope was spiking right then, in a way that I think you hadn't seen following the history of the country in so long.
It was like a major slap in the face. So people who were on the street protesting, really, made you see what Lebanon could be. All of a sudden, they were just kind of thrown down on the floor, and many of them were at that moment. What happened since, eventually the country kind of, this country seems to always be able to do this, to kind of get out of the ashes and rebuild itself. And many of the women who had left came back.
Oh.
It's not easy to leave. So some of them came back. Things got better. There was hope. There was a woman I photographed who had a big tattoo on her back that says Kuwa, which means strength. And she got that tattoo right after the port explosions. When I saw her last fall at Paris Photo, her photo was exhibited. I'm like, I want to photograph your tattoo with your picture. And she had covered it with a gigantic flower. Huh. And she said, I'm in a much better place now. And I can't help but think of her now with what's happening.
And she's a photographer as well.
She's a photographer as well.
Yes,
so now it's like another set of dreams getting shattered again. But what's happening now is very tragic. I mean, a quarter of the population has been displaced. They're bluntly talking about occupying the South. Nobody's even pretending not to be saying it anymore. And people have been displaced from the southern suburb of Beirut. People sometimes don't realize it's a tiny country. So when they're bombing the southern suburb of Beirut, it's about 1.5 miles away from the center of Beirut.
Right.
So people are not sleeping all night and they're hearing it. So it's pretty bad. And the question sadly comes up again, where do I go? Where do they go? The book was meant to be almost kind of like published to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the Civil War, which was April 2025. Now we're April 2026, and things are worse than ever.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that context. I think that a lot of our listeners might not be familiar with all of these details, so I really appreciate having that because it really does inform how we look at the work in this show and in this book. I would really like for our listeners who have not seen the show, if we could describe it a little bit and talk about some of the photos and just how the work is laid out. Leila, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I suppose that is my job, right? Yeah, I mean, I was joking yesterday that it's very easy to curate very beautiful and meaningful work, but it's not. I mean, there are many challenges to it because the photos are so powerful uniquely on their own. They're, very individual. Usually it's just one woman at a time that you're collaborating with. Sometimes they're in architectural settings, like in buildings, many of those buildings abandoned, or they're outdoors, they're in nature, sort of immersed in the natural environment. Sometimes they're by the ocean, sometimes they're set against the sky, but there are these really captivating, very individual portraits of these young women that Rania has collaborated with in settings that are either individually meaningful to them or collectively meaningful to the identity of young Lebanese women. And, I'm sitting with Rania looking at this material in her studio in Boston. And I'm not actually thinking a lot about what the show will look like. I'm really just thinking, like, what are the images that I think will tell the story as I understand it, as I've followed it vicariously through Rania and through my own experiences being in Lebanon. Like, what do I think will speak to someone who's outside of this story as well? So it was this multi-layer process of discovery, of editing, and putting together something that would be visually compelling, knowing that the work was going to be beautiful no matter what. And I'm not sure I described the show very well. There are two very bright red walls internally. Rania loves red, and there's a lot of red in her work. And her work is very strong, so it can actually, not all work can compete against bright red. Your work can. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, I make the work, I edit the work, I kind of so attach to the work. It's nice to come in a space and see how Leila curated it and put it together. And it felt like, now it's kind of out in the world. And I was really pleased. The show looks so beautiful. So I know we're talking about all the difficult things about Lebanon, but there's also so much beauty in Lebanon. And I hope that also comes through the images, because as we're talking about the difficult situation, there's also, again, it's a beautiful country. The textures are beautiful, the sea, the mountains, even the old walls that have witnessed layers and layers of history. But also these women give me so much hope. I mean, they're majestic. And I feel like, I hope the powers come through the images.
Yeah.
And the sense that they belong to this place, whether it's with the color, the texture, or the reaction to the space.
Yeah. Yeah, could we talk a little bit about those layers that you described? There's kind of this contrast between beauty and destruction, it seems to me like. And some of the spaces are damaged in ways that look like, maybe they were bombed, and then some of them just look like maybe they were damaged but then abandoned, and so there's neglect and decay. And also the way that you photograph them, those surfaces, the walls in these buildings are just, they're so rich with texture and color and history and just kind of layer upon layer. I'm thinking of the one of the woman in, I think it's a hotel.
Oh, the Grand Allée Hotel. Yeah.
Yes.
The black.
Yes, and with the skirt, with the floral print, and then there's a kind of a painting above. Just, I could stare at that image for days. The different layers on the walls showing all these iterations of what this building maybe has been. And then behind her, like she's behind some kind of frame, and then behind her, it seems like there's a mirror that's also fragmented. I mean, it's just incredible. I don't know if you'd like to talk about that one a little bit.
I'm so glad you saw all that in it. You know, to talk about the layers, Lebanon has a lot of texture. That's kind of all I could describe it. And there's layers of history on these walls. Like even when you walk on the street, sometimes you have a graffiti and then it's covered with ads of some sort. Then the ads start dripping. Then there's a picture of some leader of some sort, and then this kind of thing, and you have an internet kind of ad of where you could get Wi-Fi or something, and you have these kind of, they become almost the fabric of the city.
Yeah.
And the destruction, the layers are also, there's a level of decay sometimes that's not necessarily bombed.
Right.
And sometimes there are places that have been bombed, and you don't know if this is a destruction from left over from the Civil War of this, or is this is something that happened through different wars or the 2006, or I mean,
2006.
Yeah, you add it up, and then the port explosions. So the layering is pretty important.
Yeah.
But also, this was a country that was what they referred to as the Paris of the Middle East. So I'm coming back to that hotel, because people used to come from all over the world to these beautiful places, and this hotel is in the mountain in a gorgeous village called Alay. And I had been to that hotel to photograph before, but I had never discovered that specific room. And I think it was like a bar / kind of a gambling place of some sort. So when I went in with her, it's kind of interesting. Her name is Raya. And I always tell the women, bring different clothes with you, because sometimes I don't know them. I don't know what the space is going to look like. I don't know what the photo shoot is going to look like. And it's nice to have options.
Yeah.
And she had showed me that skirt, and they had the top as well. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't like that at all. Let's leave it in the car. And then we went in that space. And when I all of a sudden saw the whole thing, I'm like, sorry, I'm going to go back at that skirt.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because there's a mural type image above her that has a floral aspect to it that really speaks to that skirt. Like it's like they were made for each other.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And so this one for me also speaks to the good old days of Lebanon, the beautiful golden age as well. And so this hotel was not bombed. This has just been abandoned and decayed. And during the war, the Civil War, some of these villages would like fight with each other. There'd be a Druze village and a Christian village, and so people kind of fled, and something you might see leftovers from wars without them having been necessarily bombed.
And so a lot of these spaces that you're photographing in, they're not rare examples of these really, that's the kind of thing I would seek out and try to find those kind of spaces to photo. But it sounds like this is really representative of the fabric of the place.
Absolutely. But I was seeking them out as well. And I'm so grateful I got access to so many of them, because as things got a bit better before now, somehow a lot of these places some of them I did trespass, we were climbing over things, but some of them, they really now lock them and you cannot go in. One of them being that hotel.
I wanted to ask you about your relationship with the women that you photograph and how you approach that.
So before I go to Lebanon, I always put a call on Instagram, since I started working on this project, that I'm coming to Lebanon from this date to this date. I'm working on this project, and if you'd like to collaborate and tell your story, please reach out to me. By then, I had enough that I could show people, and I got a pretty incredible response. And I never asked people to send me their pictures. I mean, this is not like a scouting agency of any sort. And I figured any woman who's going to reply to me is going to be interesting and courageous and creative, because it's hard to put yourself out there. So that's kind of how it starts. And then we schedule a time to talk, and I start hearing from them what is their relationship to Lebanon, what it means to them, if there's a place that they'd like to be photographed, and we start from there.
Right.
If they don't have any idea, we typically could pick something that affects all of us, like the Holiday Inn Hotel or locations like that. But then once we go there, I have to establish that trust with them. And I really want them to feel like they have agency, because I feel like if they don't contribute, then it's just me portraying what I want to see. And for me, it's very much this kind of back and forth that happens throughout the shoot that's meaningful.
Yeah, so it does feel more like a collaboration than
Absolutely.
a photographer and a subject.
Yeah. But some of the women who I really, it's like everything in life. There are some women I really bonded with who's like, oh my God, we should do that again or whatever. So sometimes I would reach out to them if I knew I wanted to go to a place that's going to be hard to access and I want to make sure it's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love it that we're able to do that.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about an example of that?
Yeah, I talk about the Holiday Inn Hotel. The hotel is kind of this monstrous thing of 28 stories high that's still completely in a state of abandonment, destruction, bullet holes, everything. And when I was growing up, I lived on the 7th floor. We were on a hill, so I could see the Holiday Inn almost straight on. I would put binoculars, and I saw every single room burned, the curtains and the whole thing, one by one. And it's an image for me that stuck more than anything else in the Civil War. The hotel had just finished in 1974. It was like, again, the golden age of Lebanon. Everybody was so proud of it. And it had like on the top floor a restaurant that rotated to show all of Beirut. And in 1976, during the Battle of the Hotels, it started getting destroyed. And it still is in that same shape of utter destruction. And it took me 5 years to be able to figure out how to get access. So when I wanted to get access, I wanted to go with somebody who I know I'm going to get great pictures. And again, it's something that these women were not part of the Civil War, but it's very much part of the backdrop of their lives. It's part of our collective memory. So some of the images also stem from that.
Yeah, that building is like, when you go to it, even as a foreigner, you sense its presence, even if you don't know the story, because it still is quite towering. It's so pockmarked. It's so like, obviously I think there's one big gaping hole on one of the sides, so you can tell that this building has been through hell. And then around it is sandbags and barbed wire, and there's a military presence inside. There are tanks garrisoned inside. Like, the whole thing is basically a de facto sort of little military fort, because of this sense of what it represents, So it's not just like sneaking through some boarded windows. This is like literally going
that
in
was
through
serious.
the soldiers. Yeah.
I had to get permissions, and it was kind of comical because I would send an email. I eventually got to the right person. They need my ID, the ID of the woman who's coming with me, anybody who's going to be with me, exact day I want to go and whatever. And I will send it like 2 weeks in advance, follow up every day. And then, for example, I would ask for it for like the 26th of the month. And I get an email on the 27th telling me that I got access. So
wow.
I go there with my access. They're like, oh, but you can't give it to you because that was for yesterday. So
oh, my gosh. Wow. And so let's describe one of those photos from the Holiday Inn with the woman's name's Petra.
Petra, good memory.
Yeah.
Actually, and another thing that was kind of, it's so Lebanon, and you got to love it for that. Once I eventually got access, the army, a couple of them would stay with me, but they were the sweetest thing, and they were so excited to be part of like helping us move things around. Where do you want to go? At some point I found the rug and they would move the rug for me. And then I'm like, well, I really want to go to the top. So it's like,
wow,
there's no elevator anymore, obviously. So it's like a spiral staircase. And it's me, Petra, and these army guys going up a spiral staircase to the top of the restaurant.
And she's wearing this like yellow dress.
Yeah, I have to say, I give so much credit to these women. And Petra is standing in the swimming pool. That's, again, you see all the shrapnel and the bullet holes in the pool. And she's standing and looking up. So you see her from the back as if she's all the way at the bottom and looking at this humongous thing. And she's even on her tippy toes. And you see the
dirt at
the bottom of her feet, which I love.
And all around her is this beautiful, like, sort of green-blue tile, like the tiling, this really intricate tiling, square tiling of the pool, and then the cinder blocks and all that detritus. Yeah, and then she's sort of almost like looking up, and the horizon line for that is so high because you're in the pool.
Yeah.
And then so you just start to get to see the bottom layers of the building and the bullet holes in them, and you have a sense that there's much more to be seen.
You see that. And what's a little gift that, honestly, I mean, there was so much to take in visually that I noticed that as I was editing, that her dress almost matches the grid of the building, because it's kind of a very brutalist architecture. It's all out of concrete and
Yeah,
you know.
and she has this bright yellow dress with kind of a white cross on the back of it. Yeah. Can you say, you mentioned the Battle of the Hotels, and I think that's something that a lot of people might not know about.
You know, honestly, the Civil War is like a big mystery because people were fighting people and then all sorts of allegiances would shift over the years and you really didn't know who's fighting who at some point. And the Civil War didn't lead to any changes in...
No one won the Civil War.
No one won the Civil War. So people who were fighting against each other, I don't even know who was in which hotel. This is an area that had all the nice hotels. There was like the Riviera Hotel, the Holiday Inn, the Phoenicia Hotel. It was like these beautiful...
The St. George, isn't it?
St. George, yeah. There was this kind of beautiful magnet of tourists. It's right by the water. And people would just hide from hotels and shoot at each other. Honestly, this is kind of what,
Yeah, there was the strategic and symbolic aspects of it, right? There's these beautiful hotels. They're like right in downtown Beirut. They're near the water. And the Holiday Inn being quite tall, is very strategic kind of place to position yourself from. Yeah.
Early in your career, you went to photograph in a Palestinian camp, and was that in Lebanon?
Yes, there were 12 refugee camps scattered around Lebanon. Lebanon at that point was probably a population of about 4 million or 4.5 million, and there are about 500,000 Palestinian refugees. And many of them are now there's probably a fourth generation being born in the camps.
Definitely is.
So they're not integrated into Lebanese society, and it's pretty tragic. So I didn't even know that because when I grew up in the Civil War, my circle was tiny, like where I could go, where I couldn't go. And so I didn't know that you could drive about 5-10 minutes towards southern Beirut and end up in a refugee camp. And that people lived in those conditions. In 2002, I went with a cousin of mine who wanted to make a movie about the 20th anniversary of the massacres of Sabra and Shatila from 1982.
These are Palestinian refugee camps.
In the Sabra and Shatila, yes. And I was shocked, actually. And, my father's Palestinian originally, and the Christian Palestinians were able to have a Lebanese nationality. So before my father got married, he did get the Lebanese nationality, which I'm grateful for because I grew up Lebanese.
It would have changed your whole trajectory of your life. Yeah, you would have grown up in a camp.
Because you only could get the citizenship from your father in Lebanon. So in a way, it kind of brought me back to I need to tell that story. That's also part of my identity.
Wow.
In the beginning, I was very tentative. And then, every once in a while, you have somebody who gives you some feedback that kind of makes major change in your life somehow. I was showing my work at what you call a portfolio reviews. And I have images of my children and the early images I had made in the Palestinian refugee camp. And I was sitting with that reviewer, and he told me, you need to get that same intimacy with everybody you photograph as these pictures of your children. And that really stuck to me. I use a wide-angle lens. I'm pretty close to people, and I realized I needed to be also close physically and be able to get the right access. So I hope I was able to keep that through all my work. It really resonated. So photographing my kids taught me that, the intimacy, the importance of intimacy, but also the beauty in the mundane,
Yeah. Do you usually use natural light, or do you bring in lights and...
I don't use, it's almost pathetic.
No, it's not pathetic. It's
I
so
only
great.
use one camera and one lens.
And no artificial
No
lighting.
artificial light. I feel like if you want to work, I want to be able to be there.
Yeah.
I don't want to carry stuff or bring assistance or anything. I just want to be there.
Can you explain what a wide-angle lens is, like what that allows?
Yes, sorry. I assume, yeah. A wide-angle lens means I have to be close. Otherwise, I'm going to see everything except the person. So I use the equivalent of what's called a 35 millimeter lens. So it's not too wide as to distort anything, but it's wide enough that I could be sitting, 3 feet from a person, 5 feet from a person, and be able to talk to them and also make the picture. And I feel this was important to me because I wanted to build these relationships.
We've talked some about Lebanon as a subject, I think, of your work, but also your work as a photographer has really focused on women and girls. And I was wondering if you could talk about your approach to that subject matter and how your projects have shifted focus over the years.
My work is very inspired by my daughters, and it feels like it's following them through the ages in a way, almost instinctively. I don't think it's a conscious decision. I first became even a photographer after September 11 to tell a different story of the narrative of the Middle East that we're hearing in the West, the rhetoric of them versus us. And like, this is not what I know of Lebanon. Even if I grew up during a war, the people are kind and beautiful and hospitable, and we're all being demonized and lumped into one category almost. So I started going back to photograph. And my first book was kind of based in Lebanon, called Ordinary Lives. After that, I decided I want to photograph in the U.S. I live here. I don't want to just be photographing in the Middle East. And I started a project inspired by my older daughter when she was 14 or so, called A Girl in Her Room. I started photographing teenage girls, and it kind of organically ended up being in the girl's bedroom.
Yeah.
And it felt like this is the age where you kind of isolate yourself in there, and the only place you could control, and you could surround yourself with the stuff that means something to you, whether it's a political figure or a rock star or whatever it is. And at some point during this work, I realized that I was exactly like those women so many years earlier, different country, different culture, but there's something so universal about growing up. So I decided to photograph women in my two cultures, really. And this kind of became a consistent in my work. And then I did a project called L'Enfant Femme, which was inspired by my younger daughter right before puberty, and how she's starting to become a woman, but she's also like this child at the same time. And there was such a beautiful awkwardness to that age. And then I became interested in the passing of time and rephotographing these girls a few years later.
Oh, wow.
And at the same time, then my older kids, I have twins, went to college, and I became interested in what it means, like the whole mother-daughter relationship. I lost my mother when I was 3, and I'm learning it firsthand with my kids. So I started a project photographing mothers and daughters.
Oh, wow.
But in all this work, till the more recent project, I was photographing mainly in the Middle East and in the U.S. to focus on shared humanity, that we all might be in different places, but ultimately we're all going through the same biological, emotional, physiological changes at the same time. And then I started a project that I was grateful and honored to get a Guggenheim for, that I titled She. And it was the first time that I was really photographing these women, again, the ages of my daughters by then, once they leave home. So it was the first work I did outside the domestic familial space and how they're reacting to the outside world.
As we were wrapping up, I asked Rania if there was anything she would like to add.
You know, I also want to say what's important is often when we talk about war, and now we just talk about numbers and about like 1.2 million displaced, 1,200 people who died. It almost abstracts the effects of the war.
Yeah.
So I hope my images could show some of the faces behind the wars. Some of the women in the pictures are from South Lebanon, and they have been displaced. Some of them probably lost family. So it's important to put that in perspective.
Yeah. I mean, right now.
Right now.
Yeah.
And always.
Hundreds of thousands of people in South Lebanon have been displaced.
Yeah. So some of them are the people whose pictures you're going to see on the walls.
It does have a really big effect when people can see the faces and the spaces and the stories.
Yeah.
Really, really consider the stories of each individual. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate it.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with photographer Rania Matar and curator Leila Reichert. Rania's exhibition, Where Do I Go?, is on display at the Sidney and Lois Eskenazi Museum of Art at Indiana University in Bloomington through August 2nd, 2026. I'm Kayte Young. More nice work just ahead.